Folks, if you live near Lake Anna, Lake Anna, Virginia, which is in Louisa and Spotsylvania counties, if you swim in Lake Anna, if you fished in it, raised your kids on its shores, you've probably been told the same thing I was told. Quote, that water never touches the reactor. Or, quote, it's completely safe. Or, quote, there's nothing in that lake. And when I pushed back, when I said, I think the nuclear plant is contaminating that water, somebody just the other day looked me dead in the face and said, that's not possible. And found it quite humorous that I considered that a possibility. So I did what I do. I went looking, not for what Dominion Energy wants you to believe, not for what the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's PR department puts in a pamphlet. I went looking for what's documented, what's filed, what's buried in federal reports and DOJ memos and peer-reviewed studies. And what I found is a pattern of concealment, of canceled studies, of questions that were deliberately never allowed to be answered until 6 weeks ago, when Harvard blew the whole fucking thing open. And I'm Roby, and this is the Manufactured Mind. Hope everybody's doing well today. Today's episode is the study that never happened. So before we get into the hard stuff, I want to make sure everybody understands how a nuclear power plant works, because the industry counts on you not knowing, and when you don't know, you can't ask the right questions. The North Anna Power Station sits on about 1,000 acres in Louisa. It has 2 pressurized water reactors that went online in 1978 and 1980. Together, they generate roughly 1.79 gigawatts of power, about 17% of Virginia's electricity. That power goes mainly to the greater Richmond area and northern Virginia. Now, Lake Anna. This is important. Lake Anna is not a natural lake. It was engineered. The Virginia Electric and Power Company, also known as VEPCO, which is now Dominion Energy, dammed the North Anna River in the late 60s and flooded what was mostly farmland and woods to create one of the largest freshwater bodies in Virginia. They built the lake for one purpose: to cool the nuclear power plant. Here's how the cooling works, folks. And this is where the industry's favorite talking points come in. Or come from, rather. The plant operates on 3 separate water loops, okay? Think of them as 3 independent plumbing systems that are designed to never mix. Loop 1 is inside the reactor itself. It uses ultra-pure water. Water so processed you can't even drink it, to absorb the heat from the nuclear fission process. This water gets extremely hot, but is kept under enormous pressure so it does not boil. Loop 2 takes that heat, not the water itself, but the heat, and transfers it through what's called a steam generator. The second loop's water does boil, creating steam that spins massive turbines to generate electricity. Loop 3 is where Lake Anna comes in. Water from the lake is pumped through a condenser, essentially a giant radiator, to cool the steam from Loop 2 back into liquid water so the cycle can continue. The lake water absorbs that waste, the waste heat, and it gets discharged back into the lake through a series of cooling channels called dikes. And as I'm sure everybody around the area knows about the dikes. And no, I'm not talking about lesbians. That's the hot side of the lake. the private side, where the water runs warmer because it's been used as a coolant. Now, here's the industry's core claim, because the lake water is only in loop 3. It never physically contacts the reactor, the nuclear fuel, or any radioactive material. It's just absorbing heat. If you replace the nuclear reactor with a coal furnace or a gas turbine, the lake water would serve the exact same function. And on the engineering design level, that's true. The system is designed so these loops don't mix. But design and reality are two different things, folks, and that distinction matters enormously. So what they said was impossible isn't. Let me tell you what is documented in federal filings about radioactive material at North Anna. In October of 2010, Dominion reported to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission that tritium, a radioactive isotope of hydrogen that is a direct byproduct of nuclear fission, was detected in an on-site groundwater monitoring well at a concentration of 16,500 picocuries per liter. Normal background for that site is 3,000 to 4,000 picocuries. Now, the EPA's drinking water threshold for tritium is 20,000 picocuries per liter. So Dominion was quick to say, we're below the legal limit, no cause for concern. But here's the thing, folks. Tritium shouldn't be in the groundwater at all if those 3 loops are hermetically sealed and operating perfectly. Its presence means something is leaking. By February 2012, North Anna had reported elevated tritium in groundwater 3 times in 2 years. The source of the leak, according to Dominion's own NRC filing, unknown. They identified one known source, an underground circulation water tunnel for Unit 2, and repaired it, but they admitted they were still investigating and looking at all potential causes. And in that same week, another event notification was filed because the plant discharged 120 to 200 gallons of untreated sewage onto the ground. And according to the NRC report, the station could not confirm whether untreated water reached Lake Anna. Could not confirm. Now, the 2021 annual Radiological Environment Operating Report, the official NRC document, tells us that the average tritium activity in surface water around the site was 2,658 picocuries per liter. The North Anna River, 5.8 miles downstream, measured 2,610 per liter. The report found no plant-related cesium-137 in indicator samples, and it calculated the maximum annual dose to a hypothetical person at the site boundary at 0.357 milligram, compared to the 620 milligram average. American exposure from all natural and man-made sources. So, let me be honest with you about what the data says. The data says tritium is getting into the environment. The data also says at the levels being measured, the dose is vanishingly small compared to what you absorb from the sun, from medical imaging, from naturally occurring radon in your basement. Those two things are both true at the same time. The question is not whether zero radioactive material is escaping. It is. The question is whether we should trust the entity measuring it, and whether we have enough independent data to actually know what the long-term effects are. And that is where this story gets rather ugly. So let me take you back to 1970, folks. During construction of the North Anna reactors, a geologist conducting a site assessment discovered a tectonic fault, a fracture in the Earth's crust directly beneath the construction site. This wasn't ambiguous. The geologist reported it to VEPCO. Two additional private geologists independently verified it. VEPCO, the company building a multi-billion-dollar nuclear power plant, now had a big problem. Federal regulations classified faults as quote-unquote capable, meaning dangerous to nuclear facilities. If the ground had moved within the past 35,000 years or showed recurring movement within the past 500,000 years. Here's what happened next, and this is not speculation. This is from a 1977 Department of Justice memorandum. VEPCO deliberately deleted a required reference to the geological fault before submitting its license application to the Atomic Energy Commission. In June 1973, the company told federal regulators that faulting of rock at the site is neither known nor suspected. That was a lie. They knew it, and they had known it for 3 years. According to the DOJ memo, the cover-up went beyond just the company. The memo states, and I'm going to read this very carefully, folks, that, quote, virtually the entire Office of Regulation of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the NRC, was well aware of the fault and determined not to take any immediate action. The regulator knew. The company knew. Yet they both stayed quiet. The only reason any of this came to light was a local geologist who shared what he knew with the North Anna Environmental Coalition, a citizens group. That organization contacted the Virginia Attorney General's office, and the whole thing unraveled. And get this, VEPCO was eventually convicted of making 12 false statements to the NRC. And then they were fined $60,000. That's it. That was the maximum penalty at the time. A DOJ attorney named Bradford Whitman wrote a memo recommending against criminal prosecution, but not because the evidence was weak. His reasoning was quite devastating. He wrote that he deeply regretted that criminal sanctions could not be brought, but that the government's own complicity made prosecution impractical. The NRC had sanctioned continued construction despite knowing about the fault. Let me say that one more time. The Department of Justice said they couldn't prosecute the company because the federal regulator was in on the cover-up. Now, 31 years later, in 2011, guess what happens? A 5.8 magnitude earthquake struck Louisa County, 11 miles from the North Anna plant. The plant's 2 reactors automatically shut down. One of the diesel backup generators failed. The quake exceeded the plant's original design basis for seismic activity. The same fault that they lied about, by the way. The same fault that the NRC chose to ignore, by the way. Dominion says the plant was fine. They spent $21 million inspecting it. The NRC signed off on a restart after 2 months. But the people who warned about the exact scenario in the 1970s were proven right about the risk, and yet nobody was held accountable. Yet another reoccurring pattern that I see in today's society. Nobody being held accountable. This is the company, and this is the regulator that you're trusting when they tell you that the lake is safe. Now, moving on to the study that was killed. If you're a reasonable person, you might think at this point, okay, there's conflicting information. The levels are low but measurable. The company has a documented history of concealment. Shouldn't somebody study this? Well, somebody tried. In 2010, the NRC itself asked the National Academy of Sciences, the most prestigious scientific body in the country, to conduct a comprehensive state-of-the-art study on cancer risk in populations living near nuclear power plants. This was supposed to update a 1990 National Cancer Institute study that had used outdated methods and only looked at cancer deaths, not cancer incidence. A critical distinction, because you can get cancer from radiation exposure and survive, and that 1990 study wouldn't have counted you. The NAS accepted. In phase 1, completed in 2012, they recommended 2 study approaches and identified 7 pilot sites, including Millstone in Connecticut, which is also owned by Dominion. The NAS recommended advanced study designs similar to those used in Europe, where German researchers had already found a doubling of childhood leukemia rates near nuclear power plants. The study was scientifically sound. The methodology was rigorous. The NAS estimated phase 2 would cost $8 million and take about 3 years. And in September of 2015, the NRC killed it. Their public justification was budget constraints and the claim that radiation releases were too low to cause observable health effects. The very question the study was designed to answer. $8 million. The NRC has an annual operating budget of over $1 billion. At the same time it canceled, by the way, the same time it canceled the study, the NRC signed a 20-year lease on a 3rd headquarters building in Rockville, Maryland, a commitment that will eventually cost $350 million. Now, they could afford that 3rd office building, but they couldn't afford an $8 million study on whether people living near their plants were getting cancer. Internal NRC emails, later obtained by advocacy groups, revealed that staff had already presupposed the outcome. One email stated, quote, "All the evidence shows you're not going to find anything," end quote. Think about that. Before data was collected, before the pilot study was conducted, before a single researcher knocked on a single door in a community near a nuclear power plant, the regulator had already decided what the answer was. The Boston Globe ran an editorial saying the NRC had acted, quote, "more like an industry booster than a watchdog," end quote. And 3 California House members asked the Department of Health and Human Services to pick up the study. The HHS Secretary Xavier Becerra refused, calling it, quote, "premature." Despite 60 years of nuclear power operations in the United States, the study was never completed. The most important question about nuclear power's health impact on American communities was never answered until February of 2026. The Harvard bombshell. 6 weeks ago, folks, a team of researchers at Harvard, or at the Harvard Chan School of Public Health, published what the NRC never wanted to exist. The study, published in Nature Communications on February 23rd, 2026, is titled, quote, "National Analysis of Cancer Mortality and Proximity to Nuclear Power Plants in the United States." It's the first study in the 21st century to analyze the relationship between nuclear power plant proximity and cancer mortality across every operational nuclear power plant in every county in the United States. Wow. The first. Now, let me tell you what they did and what they found, because this is rigorous science, it's not conspiracy, and it's not speculation. The researchers analyzed county level cancer mortality data from 2000 to 2018, an 18-year window. They used what's called a continuous proximity method, meaning instead of drawing arbitrary circles around plants and saying inside or outside, they measure how close each county was to nuclear facilities and accounted for the cumulative influence of multiple nearby plants. And they controlled for confounding variables. This is important because they accounted for median household income, educational attainment, racial composition, smoking prevalence, body mass index, temperature, humidity, access to healthcare, including distance to the nearest hospital. They did not simply look at cancer deaths near plants and assume radiation caused them. They built a statistical model that tried to strip away every other possible explanation. And here's what they found. Counties located closest to nuclear power plants experienced higher cancer mortality rates, even after adjusting for all of those variables. The association was strongest among older adults, males aged 65 to 74 and females aged 55 to 64. This is consistent with what we know about radiation-induced cancer, which typically involves long latency periods. You don't get exposed and get cancer next year. You get exposed and it shows up decades later. Over the 18-year study period, the researchers estimated that approximately 115,000 cancer deaths nationwide, about 6,400 deaths per year, were attributed to proximity to nuclear power plants. 115,000 deaths, folks. Now, and I have to be precise about this because precision matters. The researchers explicitly stated that these findings do not establish causality. Correlation is not causation. They did not measure direct radiation exposure at each plant. They did not determine the specific exposure pathway. But they did say this, and I want to quote the senior author, Petros Koutrakis, professor at Harvard. Our study suggests that living near a nuclear power plant may carry a measurable cancer risk, one that lessens with distance. We recommend that more studies be done that address the issue of nuclear power plants and health impacts, particularly at a time when nuclear power is being promoted as a clean solution. End quote. This study aligns with an earlier Harvard study in Massachusetts that found over 20,000 cancer cases attributable to nuclear plant proximity in that state alone, with risk declining sharply beyond about 19 miles. And it aligns with a 2024 meta-analysis published in Current Environmental Health Reports that reviewed 47 studies from 17 countries, covering 175 nuclear power plants and more than 7.5 million residents, and found increased health risks among populations exposed to radiation levels meeting current regulatory limits. Let me say that one more time. Meeting current regulatory limits. The limits the NRC says are safe. The study the NRC killed in 2015. The study they said was too expensive, too time-consuming, and unlikely to find anything. Harvard went and did it anyway, and they fucking found something. Now, Let me talk about something I hear about every summer. The algae blooms in Lake Anna. If you live around here, you know the routine. Every year, 2019, 20, 22, 23, 24, the Virginia Department of Health issues swimming advisories for sections of Lake Anna. Cyanobacteria, what used to be called blue-green algae, reaches unsafe levels and they tell you to stay out of the water. And my initial instinct, like a lot of people's, was, well, that's the nuclear power plant. Something's getting in the fucking water. But here's where I have to be honest about what the evidence actually shows, because I'm not going to stand here and tell you something that isn't supported by data just because it fits a narrative. The algae blooms are caused by nutrient loading, phosphorus and nitrogen from agricultural runoff, septic system leachate. I don't know how to say that word actually. And residential development around the lake. Warm water plus excess nutrients equals cyanobacteria growth. This happens in lakes and reservoirs all over the country that have nothing to do with nuclear power. In fact, and this is ironic, the nuclear plant's warm water discharge may actually help suppress blooms in certain areas because it creates currents that mix water from different depths and dilute nutrient concentrations. The Virginia DEQ added Lake Anna to the impaired water list, the quote-unquote dirty water list, in 2022 after 5 consecutive years of harmful algae blooms. That's a real environmental problem, but it's a land use problem. It's a developmental problem. It's about what's going in from the shoreline, septic tanks, fertilizer, construction runoff. Now, or not what's coming out of the power plant. Now, does the nuclear plant contribute to conditions that favor algae? Yes, in the sense that the warm water discharge raises temperatures and cyanobacteria thrive in warm water. But that's a thermal pollution issue, not a radiological one. My point is this: if you care about the lake, and I do, then you need to understand that the real threats are multiple and they're layered. The algae is a nutrient problem. The tritium is a radiological monitoring problem. And the cancer question is an epidemiological problem that nobody with regulatory authority wanted to answer. They're different problems. Conflating them weakens the argument, and the argument doesn't need weakening. It's strong enough on its own. So, where does this leave us, folks? Here's what we know for certain. 1. Dominion Energy, then VEPCO, has a documented, prosecuted history of concealing safety critical information from federal regulators. They lied about a tectonic fault directly beneath the nuclear reactors. They were convicted of making 12 false statements. The DOJ could not prosecute fully because the NRC was complicit. 2. Tritium, a radioactive byproduct of nuclear fission, has been detected in on-site groundwater at elevated levels multiple times. Dominion has identified and repaired at least one leak source, but acknowledged that investigation into all potential sources was ongoing. Low levels of tritium are measurable in surface water in the downstream river. 3. The NRC commissioned the most rigorous scientific body in America to study cancer risk near nuclear plants, then killed that study before it produced results, while its own internal communications showed staff had prejudged the outcome. 4. In February of 2026, Harvard researchers published the first 21st century national analysis of cancer mortality near every nuclear plant in the country. They found that communities closer to plants had higher cancer death rates. Even after accounting for income, education, smoking, obesity, environment, and healthcare access, they estimated 115,000 excess cancer deaths over 18 years. And 5, no independent plant-specific epidemiological study has ever been conducted on the health outcomes of populations living near North Anna. That last point there is the one I want you to sit with. So, a little personal story here. My aunt passed away from cancer last year. She was treated in Charlottesville at both UVA and Martha Jefferson. I believe it was Martha Jefferson that specifically told her that more people from Louisa County come through their cancer wards than from any other surrounding county. Now, I can't verify that claim with published data. I've looked, and there isn't a county level study that confirms or denies it. But what I can tell you is that nobody has done that study. And you have to ask yourself, why not? We have a nuclear power plant that was built on lies, a regulator that participated in covering those lies, a company that has leaked radioactive material into groundwater multiple times, a national study showing elevated cancer mortality near plants just like this one, and not a single health study focused on our community. Now, I'm not here to tell you the plant is killing people. I don't have the data to say that, rather, and nobody does. And that is exactly the fucking problem here. The question isn't whether the plant is safe. The question is, why are we still relying on the word of the only people who have a financial interest in the answer being yes? Full stop. So if you're in Louisa County, if you live on that lake that you probably overpaid for the house that you're living in on the lake. And by the way, while I'm speaking on that, how ironic, how funny is this? To live on Lake Anna, it's very expensive, especially to have a waterfront property. To live on the warm side of the lake, because there's a warm side and a cold side, as I described in the beginning of the episode. The warm side, the side that has the discharged heated water, is far more expensive to live over there than it is on the cold side. So these people are not only making money from the nuclear power plant itself, they are literally making real estate money from selling land and homes on a potential cancer-causing location. And they're selling them for a lot of fucking money. A lot of money. So again, if you live on that lake, if you drink that water, if your kids swim in it, if you swim in it, you deserve an independent health study, folks. Not conducted by Dominion, not overseen by the NRC, an independent, peer-reviewed epidemiological analysis of cancer incidence and mortality in the communities surrounding North Anna. The NRC killed the last attempt. The HHS called it premature. But Harvard just proved it's anything but premature. So, if this episode resonated with you, please share it. If you have a story in regards to this, if your family has been affected, reach out. I'd love to talk to you. This isn't the end of this conversation. This is just the beginning, folks. So, if you're on the lake, near the lake, within 20 miles of the lake, and especially on the lake, I would love to talk to people who have had cancer that live on the lake and just try to pick their brains a little bit and see what I can find out. But I would encourage everybody in this county, especially the ones on the lake, to be very concerned. And this matter should be brought to, I'm trying to think of who could, I mean, obviously the independent peer reviewed studies, but, you can't go to the Dominion, you can't go to NRC. So I guess we would have to go like governor level, maybe, or attorney general, something like that. I'll figure something out and try to put a plan together because I think that this really needs to be addressed. I really, really do. And how ironic that this Harvard study just came out this year. And I just so happened to start researching this stuff the other day because I was sitting here thinking, I think about it often because of what my aunt was told at the hospital. That's been in the back of my mind ever since. And I've fished Lake Anna. I've swam in it, when I was a kid. Like, so yeah. But anyways, I'm Roby, and this has been the newest episode of The Manufactured Mind. I want to apologize for my absence in producing an episode over the last couple of weeks. I've just been going through some personal struggles and what have you. But better late than never, right? Better late than never. I'm back and gonna do my best to keep the momentum going. So stay free, chin up, chest out, walk tall, and stay frosty, folks. And have a wonderful day. Peace out.